you've had a number of very recent dealings with China. In July, UK intelligence services warned that you were under active and direct threat from the Chinese state. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, I was sanctioned by the Chinese government. So I'm now sanctioned. That means if I can't have any financial arrangements in China, any investments that I have will be seized. And I'm sure if I was to go to China, they would make every attempt to make sure that my leaving China was on the difficult side. I'm amongst the 5 others here in the UK, and there's about 5 others in Europe. And we're all members of this organization I set up called the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. And what we've been doing is trying to hold China to account and to get the UK government to understand that China is posing a greater and greater threat to us, not just in economic terms, it's also in military terms. Their ambition now is to be the largest and most potent military power in the world, and they have set the target date, this was before COVID, to be so by about 2049. I think that's probably nearer 2040 now. And they will certainly be the largest economic power if things don't change by certainly the mid-2030s. So this does put them into puts us into a predicament, because the government itself, as you said in your piece there, the government itself is not a peaceful government. It is a very aggressive government. At home, it's committing what I consider genocide on the Uyghur and the Tibetans as they're forced into labor camps thousands of miles away from their homes. That women are sterilized forcibly, and the children are now being basically taken and made Chinese, as it were, rather than as they are their own ethnic group. And so all of that is happening. Both the Tibetans and others, inner Mongolians, are going to face the same. They've trashed the Sino-British agreement in Hong Kong, arresting people that were protesting peacefully now and putting them away under trumped-up security charges that can be a lifetime in prison. And something you didn't mention, but you did mention about naval exercise, they actually have seized the South China Seas, and they're now militarizing it. They have no historic right to the South China Seas. It's bordered by the Philippines, Vietnam, and others who all contest this. But China has taken it over because it's got, we believe, oil and resources there, and they're now claiming it as part of China. And they're now threatening Taiwan. And since the sad part about Afghanistan is, amongst many other sad bits, is that Chinese now claim that as a result of the messy departure of NATO troops, that they've said publicly to the Taiwanese, they've said that when the war comes, you will not be supported by the Americans, because look at what's happened in Afghanistan. So we are in a very dangerous moment, I think, with China, and it's one that we need to accept and then deal with.
How on earth do we deal with this? Because when we talk about things such as China's predatory mercantilism, and often people refer to the situation, say, in Sri Lanka, where they've managed to seize a port where the repayments did not meet the schedules, we tend to look abroad, but we have so much Chinese infiltration here. We have academic capture. We've got Chinese operating at the highest levels of our institutions. But not only that, we've got communist state-controlled companies and entities who have bought parts of businesses, who are part of, critical infrastructure. How on earth do we now say we need to retract from that so we can be in a position where China does not have leverage over us to then be able to stand up to Beijing?
Well, we've sleepwalked into this, like much of the West, but we, peculiarly in Britain, as a result of what I think the failed and pointless policy of George Osborne's golden decade or era, I can never remember quite what it was, in which we were basically opening our doors to China. Something quite interesting, which your viewers may find interesting, is that the latest figures show that over the period of COVID, most other countries that we deal with, particularly in Europe, saw their imports from China fall as a proportion of their GDP, with one exception, the UK. Our imports from China rose by a staggering 26%. So our earlier dependency has now become astonishing. A lot of that was, of course, healthcare products, PPE and various other bits and pieces. But it is astonishing fact that we are now purchasing more. They now have become we import more from China now than we do from Germany, which was our other largest trading partner. So you can see straight away this shift in balance. Now, the problem with dependency is I have no problem with trade with countries. That's what we're about. Sometimes you're in the black, sometimes you're not. But with China, the problem is it comes with strings attached, because there is no such thing as a private Chinese company, because all Chinese companies are under legal restriction to work with the intelligence services of China, reporting back any data gathered or any knowledge found. If they don't, their chief executives get arrested and put into prison. Everybody's monitored over in China anyway, so there's no hiding place for you. And they run this at a very tight ship. And you talked about COVID earlier. The reality is that we will never be able to prove for certain that COVID came from the laboratory in Wuhan. And the reason for this is almost immediately COVID broke out, China shut the laboratory down and basically have done a scorched earth policy. There is not a single document referencing any of this that you can refer to find out to what extent they were playing around with essentially what looks to me like a pangolin virus, and seeing how it would work. That it got out may well have been an accident. Somebody carried it out without realizing it on their clothes. But the devastation is tens of millions of people have died around the world. Economies have come to a juddering halt. So this has there's a reason for this. So they are brutal. And on the Belt and Road stuff, quite interestingly enough, the Belt and Road isn't about progression. What it does is the Chinese say to a country, let's say, I don't know, like Nigeria, we will help you with your new networks, 4G or 5G networks. But what they have to do is buy Chinese equipment after they're loaned the money. The money goes back to China again, and often many, many Chinese scientists and others are sent out there to operate it and to fix it up. And still Nigeria will have to repay that loan in due course. It's a very aggressive process. How do we deal with it? Well, the truth is we have to look at their economic dominance. And the reality for us is we now need to figure out strategically whether we can go on being as dependent. China needs us to carry on investing in China and buying their products, because they must grow at 5.5% a year, or they will literally retreat, as it were, economically, very damaging for them and their growing middle class. And so we have some control over that, because, of course, it's due to our money, for the most part, that China is growing so rapidly, and our purchasing of their equipment. We should, in my view, be investing in India and building that up, which is a country that China fears greatly because of its potential and capability. And it's an old ally and friend of ours, and we should look to help and assist them to make sure there is a counterbalance in the region. And we should be working with our allies in the Far East, not just the Australians and New Zealanders, but many countries around the Pacific Rim who are very keen for us to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership and work with the Americans. And the truth is, this threat to Taiwan is real.
Yeah, you and I align completely on this, but there have been a couple of interpretations of what China is doing here during the course of this programme. There's the idea that actually China's facing its own debt crisis. It's having this sort of predatory mercantilism to feed the machine, the manufacturing machine, so it can sort of outrun that debt crisis. And the rest of it is essentially braggadocio, so the Communist Party of China can make sure that the people keep it in position. But then the other viewpoint of this is China knows exactly what it's doing, that it behaves willfully in a sinister fashion, that it knew full well what it was doing as it allowed COVID to spread around the world, and has opportunised that, exploited it in order to continue to sell and grow its economy aggressively. And now it's, pairing military actions with some of its bilateral arrangements and the Belt and Road Initiative to then be able to take hold of strategic geopolitical positions. Which China do you think that we're looking at? Is it the one that's bark is worse than its bite, or is it one that hasn't bitten yet and very well could?
I think one of the first things we have to accept is we shouldn't talk about China, really. We should be talking about the Chinese Communist Party, and particularly President Xi, who has made himself the leader for life. And that shows the extent of his power. What we are dealing with now is a China under President Xi, which is a very aggressive government and a very aggressive country as a result, hell-bent on domination. And President Xi has made it very clear about his ambitions, economic ambitions to overtake the Americans and his military ambitions to overtake the Americans. And he is setting out to achieve it. There are fault lines in their economic plan, some significant fault lines. They are reaching the point where really they can no longer continue in certain areas to consider themselves as a producer of cheap product, because it's getting more and more difficult to do so. They are going to be hamstrung slightly because the US has decided now to move all microprocessor technology back to the United States. And that's critical because China has stolen and copied and taken away from companies that have invested in China all sorts of technology. But the one area that they are still behind the US and thus the free world is in microprocessor technology. Probably they're about 10 to 12 years behind, and they've never really been able to close that gap. So that moving away will help. But, you know, they own 85% of the world's rare earth mines, which are the materials, metals and things that go to the making of this thing, the computer and the telephone you use and everything else. So they have a real lock on that. Also, by the way, it's these materials that make the batteries, which so many of our local authorities are charging China to try and get to make their public vehicles work. And therefore net zero is part of the problem in a way, because unless we think very carefully what we're doing, all we will do is add yet more capability and power to China. Almost every single electric-based car of any great nature is built in China now. I know everybody loves those American electric vehicles made by Elon Musk, but they're all produced in China. Apple telephones are produced in China, although there is talk about Apple moving them back to the USA. And they are building a mega battery factory about every 3 to 4 weeks in China. So they intend to make sure they stay ahead of the curve as they watch the West rush to net zero. But they're not doing the same. So it's very difficult. My view is we have to face up to the economic challenge, deal with that, and recognize now it's time to move our investments to other places, other countries that are closer to our own values, and work with them. And we've got to recognize now that we've got to break the stranglehold that China has on the sort of metals and materials that we need for the building of computers and telephones, which much of the mines that they're in are use slave labor, which is appalling also. So we've got to recognize that we have a long way to go in trying to figure out how we get China either to recognize the international order and the rules-based order on trading and on and in cooperation, or we need to find a way to constrain them. And I think that is the future for us. But meanwhile, China is pumping money all over the world to get its apologists out and making the case that the China I describe is not the China that exists.
So, Iain, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your thoughts. And, you know, this country should be incredibly grateful that someone like you can speak with such candour and is keeping their eye very keenly on the situation. We'll definitely be talking about this again in the future. Thank you ever so much. See Iain Duncan Smith there.